Hello, and welcome back to OxPod, conversations with students at the University of Oxford.
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we have Leo. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself? What degree do you do? Where do you do it? Why did you do it?
Hi, I'm Leo. I'm a second year history student at Trinity College. And why did I do it? Well, that's a good question. I think it's because I'm passionate about the topic and I always wanted to study at Oxford. I was born in Oxford, though I didn't grow up here.
Okay.
And that did lead me to be able to say the incredibly pretentious thing, which is, why do you want to go to Oxford? Oh, well, I felt like coming home.
Oh, okay.
Although there's absolutely no truth to that.
But you can say it. You can technically say it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you grew up in Oxford.
No.
You didn't.
No.
So
born here.
you were born, and then where did you move?
Away. First couple of years of my life in Oxford, but I don't remember any of it.
Okay.
But very young, I moved to Italy.
Okay.
When I grew up until I was around 6 or 7. Then we moved to Hounslow, London, for about 4 or 5 years before moving to Hampshire, where my parents ended up separating. So I got even more homes. Not that I had that.
That's an optimistic way to look at it. I mean, that's a glass half full way.
Twice as many Christmas presents.
Twice as many Christmas presents. Okay.
That's the optimistic mindset.
Okay, so this was still in Italy, right?
This is in Hampshire, in the UK.
Okay, now in Hampshire. Yeah.
So Italy, London, Hampshire.
Very exciting. Okay.
It's not that exciting. It's sort of a pretty linear progression from UK abroad back to UK.
Mm-hmm.
Went to school there. Went to a state school called King's, and then Peter Symonds, which is one of the largest sixth forms in the country. The one cool thing about it is that it's the sixth form where they send all the people from Falkland Islands to board, which is cool.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And after that, I worked for about a year and a half before coming here.
And this was in Dubai, right?
It was in Dubai, a bit in the other place, Cambridge.
Okay, so then
To answer that question,
you go through this process and you're traveling and doing research, participating in production, and then Oxford. How did that, so that you finished your A-levels, so for those who aren't from the UK, there's sort of the GCSEs or let's say middle school, and then depending on how you perform, you select your GCSEs, you try to do well on them, and then that gives you access, depending on performance, to sixth form, which then prepares you for your A-levels, and then should one undergo those examinations, that's what sort of is used to apply to universities. So you finished your A-levels, then did the documentary work, and then came back and decided to go to Oxford, or what was the timeline there?
So that great 2020 event, coronavirus.
Okay.
I had my A-level. I predicted that coronavirus would result in a global shutdown. I like to think in quite a perceptive
How
way.
many days before the shutdown began? That because there's the oracular power.
Were you speculating?
Oh, well, I was in Russia at the time, and I remember first hearing about it when I used to sort of browse this site, reddit.com.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you've heard of it. This obscure website. And so I was browsing it, and I saw somewhere...
Oh, wasn't it pronounced Redact?
Redact, yes.
Yeah,
Redact.com. So I was browsing it, and I started to see the first headlines of it being a thing in China. I remember maybe a few podcasts were mentioning it, and how it seemed like a local thing. Maybe it would have been like Ebola, or was it SARS? There's a few things. And then when no one was wearing masks, I was thinking, oh yes, Japan, Korea, it's an acceptable thing that if you have a cold, if you have the flu, that this is one way that you can nip it in the bud and make sure that you don't sort of excessively spread that virus. So I was already looking into it and telling my friends, trying to proselytize them and tell them, this is big, you have no idea. I felt like I was sort of the first sort of Noah.
Mm-hmm.
It was very strange. I was reading all this, and there was a complete ambivalence in Moscow. And then I think I almost got over it just as it became implemented. And I was like, oh, okay, I tried the mask, whatever. I distinctly recall that the day that it was making the headlines, I was visiting a personal trainer who had moved to a different gym and I was trying to figure out if I wanted to do the 30-minute commute to keep seeing him.
Sure.
And as we're chatting, he says, "Oh yeah, it's a great new place. You should really come over, Rick. You heard about that COVID thing that's doing the rounds? Like, let's hope that doesn't come over here to Russia, because if it does, gyms are going to be screwed." Because he had graduated with a degree in hygiene, and so he was saying that metal on the barbells and the dumbbells really retains people's germs. So he was like joking, "Oh, bro, that would be total collapse of our business." And we were like, wow. And then a few weeks later, everything shut down. And so, yeah, I remember that, and that was interesting.
How bad was it in Russia? I mean, I read reports that it's pretty dire.
Well, it's hard to tell because people were accusing the government of fabricating statistics, which has happened before. And it's a combination of there being a different relationship to truth in the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation, and also the West using the fact that the Soviet Union has had a history of manipulating statistics as a tool of propaganda. So it's hard to tell. Definitely, I think that the numbers that we were being given in Russia by the West and by, I think it's Stas, the National Statistical Organization, I would
to the days of Prada.
Yeah, I would have felt, I wasn't sure, but there's no way to tell. The way that they did it in Moscow.
How did it feel?
How did it feel? There was a sort of fatalism for a lot of people. People in the metro for the longest time did not wear masks, even when it was being slowly enforced. And I think that's because, I don't know if it's changed now, that there's the war in Ukraine. Yeah. But previously, many people who were above 30 and 40 years old were very disenchanted with both the Soviet Union that fell, and sort of they felt betrayed by that dream. And then also there was this mafia capitalism that reigned from 1991 to well into the 2000s before Putin came in. And so you would think that a nation that has experienced totalitarian states for quite a while would be very subservient. But on the contrary, at least in Moscow, many people were quite flagrant in their disobedience, not as a moral act and not as an act of protest, but more so, what are you going to do to me? I don't really care. And because there was this critical mass of people who were just like, whatever, you would see many older people just not wearing masks, and they're like, well, if it happens, it happens. At least in the early days. And you could see there was a sort of arms race between people's progressively stronger resistance to these mandates and the government trying to slowly get their foot in the door. There were ads that were running in newer metro trains of this guy, sort of young guy in a suit. He's helping an old lady across the road, opening the door for a woman, doing something else. And then the text was something along the lines of, "You're all polite young men." And then he sneezes into his hands and rubs it onto somebody's hand. And then it's sort of this demonic red light. It's like, if you're so polite about everything else, why aren't you polite about disease? And then it sort of smash cuts to this sort of heavenly white aura, and he's sneezing into his sort of dabbing, and it's say, be like this sort of stuff. And it wasn't working for a long time because people had had enough. People in Russia, younger people, there's a split between being very anti and being very sort of liberal, pro-Western, and then other people who, almost in response, as a counterculture, were very pro-government. There was that element, but for most people, they didn't give a. They didn't want to be a part of it. I think it was different outside of Moscow and outside of St. Petersburg, where that contrast is much stronger, of entire villages and entire towns where everybody's very patriotic, and then occasionally there'll be subcultures, like sort of a punk-esque youth subculture that really hates the system. Yeah, but yeah, that was, and then the way that they did COVID mandates when they started the lockdowns was that they split Moscow into, I think, 6 or 7 letters of the alphabet, and it would go, so like the houses on one street would go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then there was this super convoluted schedule of, okay, so on Tuesday, Wednesday, A and B group can go walking outside, but D and F need to stay inside. And so theoretically, you would have your passport on you or something. Either your passport to show your legal address or your factual address if you had changed. For instance, I was registered in St. Petersburg, but my factual address stamped by the mayor. or like the local administrator I was there. So the police person could stop you and say, what's your group? But in reality, it was so hard to enforce. And also the one trick that was told to me was that if you could just get a tote bag and say that there's a preferred grocery store that's just, I think the limit was 10 kilometers, or 2 kilometers, and you say, oh, well, at 2.3 kilometers is my favorite grocery store, and I'm actually celiac, and so I need to get my gluten-free. And the police officer was just, I'm not dealing with this. It sounds plausible enough. So there were people who just have a tote bag and a croissant, and they'd be saying, a baguette, and they would just say that they were coming back. So, but I think that's
naturally.
Russia is, in a sense, a low trust society where, because that trust has been eroded in the government, many systems just don't work in the way that they would here in the
Based
UK.
on what you're describing, I know it's sort of, I was a big supporter of, I think, COVID restrictions and responses and remain that. But it is so funny, the way you're talking about zone A, B, C, D, whatever. It is funny how you have like the Hunger Games of 13 dystopias. It is the sort of the aesthetics and language of dystopia. And to me, something that remains very interesting is how the West and the East and everywhere in between were so bad at introducing like good measures of population control. One would think that states are, I think those people at GCHQ or inside the Kremlin, they must spend all day, scheming how can we best repress our people in times of crisis, and yet they get the golden opportunity, and they're just really bad at it.
You would think, but I think that many command economies fail because there's a certain computational mismatch between the complexity of the problem and the computational resources of a committee, and that committee is going to be homogeneous. Is it homogeneous?
I think either work.
Probably. Homogeneous in terms of either their thinking or their education. There's going to be some commonality for them to be able to collaborate. But then that poses a problem, especially in a country like the United States or Russia or China. When you've got this huge population, very different. There's no feasible way that the people on this committee can even travel to every major city in the country. So they're just operating on these cartoonish mental images of what these places are. And yet they're here to issue mandates that are going to have these. I think you have to, or at least I'm a big believer in a distributed model where you minimize the amount of government influence, not necessarily because of this sort of, not just because of the sanctity of the individual, but because of a real computational issue. You just can't. And so your margin of error will be starvation. With the Stalinist period, there were other issues involved. But if you're going to mandate the supply and demand and you're going to get involved, every single time you make a mistake, people will starve just because you're working at that scale.
I mean, it reminds you of the original Committee for Public Safety back in France in the Revolutionary period. How can, not Brussels this time, but Paris bureaucrats manage at this pre-industrial level, a population of the millions, when information travels at the speed of a horse. And hearing from a provincial village will require probably 5 people saying he said that he said that he said. At worst, at best, a letter that's likely weeks out of date by the time it finally gets processed. So it's the same problem. What was it? Computational.
Yeah, computational
limit. Yeah, I think that's something that. Okay, I pose you a question.
Go ahead.
AI.
I was just thinking. Yeah. Could that? Yeah, go ahead.
How can that at least mitigate or make easier the challenges faced by small cliques of people managing vast swathes of subjects?
So I think Peter Thiel talked about this. I didn't catch his speech at the Union, but he has been a sort of advocate for the idea that the Chinese government in particular is scaling AI. Or, I mean, that's a very broad term. We can just say, machine learning AI, the terminology has a lot of politics to it, let's say. There's the taxonomy isn't the best, but they're using modern computer systems to sort a lot of data much more at a rate that produces a qualitatively different toolbox. Because in Stalinist Russia, there what was it? 1 in 4, 1 in 3 people were informants. So within your family, it was promoted. There were whole promotional campaigns to teach children that, with these sort of just so stories of a father or mother that disagree with the regime, or that they took down their portrait of Stalin hanging in the living room.
How could
then little Ivan or little Tanya go over to their local communist commissar and denounce their parents, and then it's celebrated and it's socially conditioned.
And the portrait appears back on the wall.
Yeah, there's interesting films, Russian films about the Stalinist period. I forget the movie, but there's this scene when this family are having a discussion. It's getting tenser and tenser, and then in the shot, there's just this suitcase, and then the father finally snaps and he says, "That's been there for 3 weeks, and none of us know how it got." And then the mother is like shushing him. There was this fear, but even though there was this mass surveillance, it was all done on paper. It was all done in these different offices, these different bureaus, and there was no way of analyzing this. There was so much paperwork that just never made it up the chain of command. And often people who were sent to the Gulag were just sort of in the wrong place at the wrong time. There was a huge efficiency problem. And I think that China, within my very limited knowledge, I'm speaking far outside of my expertise, but it's completely factual. And if you disagree with me, come on the OxPod and set the record straight. They can actually process that. Yeah. They can actually they can track individuals.
Yeah. The Sesame credit system, right?
Pardon?
The Sesame credit system.
The social credit. Yes, so there's that, but I think even more so being able to process breadcrumbs in terms of CCTV cameras capturing a person's face and then being able to just track their movement.
I say read in the most don't ask me to cite this way possible. Okay. That China, and I know it's a bit of a meme in the West.
Factual information coming in right now.
These are truth bombs. That they can now use CCTV that analyzes not faces, but rather gaits.
Gaits?
The way that you walk.
Oh,
so
I see.
They can literally track the way that people walk, whether they have certain hunches, whether they're very slightly limp, even the speed or rate. Yeah. That there is now the ability to technologically track people on the basis of how they walk alone. So even if you have a ski mask, they can say, "Oh, that's Jim. That's Jimmy. He's walking 3 paces fewer, slower than usual."
I believe the U.S. police force also had a technology they unveiled wherein they were using Wi-Fi signals and tracking or measuring the latency. Yeah. And in these sort of pockets where the signal is impeded, you could infer through a wall that there was a person there, and you could also sort of see that movement to a certain degree of fidelity. And that is, I think that changes things politically. Yeah. I definitely think that... Go ahead.
In the documentary, The Dark Knight, when Batman says, "Plug me into the data set," and starts getting that sort of echo vision from everyone's cell phones. Yeah. I'm pretty sure the CIA have that technology in a vault somewhere.
I mean, perhaps not even in a vault, but it's there. The game is.
What's going on in Langley right now?
This is. I had a friend who.
He's an agent of the deep state.
Either shadowed or interned at Langley, and he said that the Starbucks there, for those listening, Langley is one of the main CIA training bases in the United States. And this friend of mine who was there interning said that at the Starbucks, they didn't take your name. They would assign you a number because it wouldn't have been particularly effective to just be calling
Agent 47. Your pumpkin spice latte.
It was that. People would be sitting there in this sort of subdued atmosphere. People were wearing suits. I'd like to think sunglasses, but maybe not. And then somebody would just say 148, and it's or 157. I feel like you could have
with extra marshmallows.
You could have disputes there if there's 2 colleagues that dislike each other, and it's like, I'm 57. No, I'm 57.
I'm not a number. I am a free man.
Yeah. But I mean, in the same way, we look at feudal societies and we think, how could people live like that? You have to work a day of your work week on your lord's land. Or you look at Neolithic societies and you look at their organizations. And yet,
I present you the meme, which is damn live like this, but just a medieval peasant.
Travelers in time, going back in time there's 3 historians and then 1 person who won the sort of lottery to be there, and they're just an average citizen, and they just decide to go all out and trash people in this alternate. Like, so we can interfere, and it will be a problem for a different timeline. It doesn't affect ours. Like, yeah. And you just start ripping in. It's like, yo, my man, how are you living? What is it? This is your hovel? This is your hovel?
What is that drip? That stained woolen is not even
designer. Man, you need to get on 5 crop rotation immediately. This 2 crop this situation, your nitrates are out of control. You need to plant some tulips, put some fertilizer on that. You are not doing this the right way. Of course. Let me pose you this. You take this bucket, put a wheel at the front, back. We call that a wheelbarrow. This is wild. Anyway, so you were saying, the point being is we look at how generations at a time, hundreds of generations. If we're talking about hunter-gatherers, then presumably the archaeological records, what is it, like 10,000, 20,000 generations, just living in this way of life that seems so incongruent. The obligations, the daily sort of tasks, and the power relationship between people who have resources and people who might not have as many. All of that, I think, is related to people's beliefs and technological capacity. There's other factors as well. You can't reduce to that completely. But I think that AI, or rather a computational, or is it processing rate, which is still, there's a rule that every 7 years it doubles.
What Moore's law?
Yes,
isn't that every
and it's still going. That's a thing that we just come to expect, which is mind-boggling, because previously, it took 200 years for something to be innovated.
A couple of years, the microchips.
We just take it for granted that the next iPhone will come out as if it grows on a tree, and it isn't the brainchild of hundreds of highly talented people trying to come up with something new and then to artificially throttle it and just spread it across. But regardless, it's amazing. But the dark side to that is that I think it is important that there are students at Oxford and other institutions who are studying the history of politics and studying the current state of it, because things are always changing and the rate of change is increasing rapidly. And so we're going into uncharted waters here. Yeah. There's never been a state like China that has 1 billion people within its sort of political borders. Granted, not all of them are on board for the whole scheme, but with this such a capacity to process that information, to also take action immediately, to be able to automatize these things such that you can immediately get a recording of somebody's phone, and maybe they've said a few keywords, and I mean the NSA has been shown to do the same thing, and it's the ambivalence towards Snowden and Assange is interesting, partially because I think many people look at it and they see it's complicated. They might heuristically side with Assange and Snowden and say, well, yeah, it's good that they did that, but what am I supposed to do? And then besides a few people who might break
protests.
And then what happens? Right. You're trying to shoot a gun at a mountain. Well, it's a little bit demoralizing, and also I think often people make a big fuss. What is that expression? The dog barks and the caravan keeps marching. Where people make a big fuss and then the government changes something and then they right, and then if it stays,
the most superficial and
and even eventually, I think psychologically people begin to just sort of, besides a few, they have children and livelihoods and so on, and people sort of the threshold for how much one has to care steadily increases, and it cuts out more and more people. So I don't know. I think the answer here is that many people are concerned. Many people are devoting a lot of time to understanding how this amount of information processing power will change the feasibility of a top-down system.
I mean, when we're talking about these computational things, we're really not talking about when AI in the sense of large language models like ChatGPT. These they pose questions of their own, but that's radically different to the type of essentially data gathering and analysis softwares, far closer to Excel than ChatGPT, that are the types of software that are being used, as you say, manage and analyze people in the way that they are. It's far more about pattern recognition and turning those patterns into easily discussable points of information that can appear on a bulletin handed to a local party chairman.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. I think that it's inevitable that tech developments in technology, you know, they don't have an inherent morality, I'd say.
The Industrial Revolution and its consequences.
So coming back to your degree. So
you grab some water.
Oh, of course. We've got some just down there.
I remembered. Including a little like digital thing, but doesn't work on top. Wow.
Yeah, we're going complete analog.
Truly
old school water.
Little
water
1.0. But there is actually a CIA microphone inside this.
Yeah, at this point, I think people have become so desensitized.
Do you want more?
No, that's all right. But thank you.
Hydration.
Hydration.
It's the fluoride. Oh, but by the way, is this going well?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
This is.
Good
I mean, it's supposed to be conversations with students. I think that it's about just having natural conversations. There's a lot of highly edited, attention-grabbing content on all of the social poison. So I think it's a refreshing break to hear something that's a little bit more genuine, hopefully.
I was just hoping this is sort of that I'm.
No.
This is as.
Yeah.
Okay,
you don't have
perfect.
to just.
Oh no, don't
natural
worry.
Conversation.
No.
All right, so
We're back.
And we're back. We're so back.
Baby, go back.
So, Oxford.
Oxford.
You decided you came back home to Oxford, to your birthplace.
Wow.
And so then, and the degree you're doing is
history.
Yes. And so, what was the process there? When did you lock that? When did you lock in Oxford? So you applied after finishing your A-levels?
No.
Right?
So, COVID.
Oh
my God.
Yes, COVID.
Wow, talk about side tangents.
Yeah.
I got COVIDed, and in fact, you never answered my question.
Oh, yes?
To continue not talking about Oxford, how far in advance to the day, you were going to give me a number, did you predict it was going to be lockdown?
Lockdown. I think 3 days after hearing the news,
Okay.
I thought that it had the potential to spread fast.
Okay.
But I don't think I knew about lockdown as a measure.
Okay.
I didn't draw the parallel with I didn't know that during the plague there were those impositions. So I think very late into the game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I kind of have a cheat answer, which is I have like these lingering family connections and friend connections in Italy. So they were the first Western country to sort of get locked down. And so from, frankly, end of January, I know it sounds awful, but I predicted not only that there would be lockdowns, but they would cancel exams.
Oh, okay.
So for a full like month and a half prior to lockdown officially being introduced on like March 17th, 21st, something like that, I was there like vibing.
Okay.
I was vibing, man. In not my proudest hour, I a couple of times played Snake IO in my politics A-level classes.
Shout out to Leo's politics A-level teacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's great. She actually went to
Keeble, okay.
Shout out
to them.
Yeah.
Okay, so you predicted that because of the lockdowns, it would be your predicted grade and not your grade, and your predicted grade was good.
It was good.
And
I mean, I'm here.
Well, yeah.
In fact, I recall, because on the 15th of March, Trinity had an open day for prospective students, and it was all about study skills and like, oh, this is how you do well in your exams. And I was there just like, I had hedged my bets that there weren't going to be these, so I felt slightly impish.
Okay.
You know, I came up the day before, free night in college accommodation.
I mean, that's how
eat
you
the
have
breakfast.
I mean, you have to navigate I think I agree with the sentiment that hard work and discipline are extremely important, but that alone, it would be perhaps maybe nice if the world worked such that just hard work got you places. But there is an element of luck and there is an element of strategy.
Yeah.
You can't just keep your head down and dig away. Well, and not even, I think it's just situational awareness and also being fortunate.
A huge amount.
I don't necessarily like the term privilege because it implies a moral failing on the part of someone who came into good fortune.
Yes.
But the term fortune I like in the sense that you didn't earn it. There was no extended action to acquire a certain benefit, but you can flip it around and, well, now that you've come into it, it's now incumbent upon you to become the kind of person that's deserving of it. There's still that you can do something about it, rather than people who sort of become dejected by the fact that they're in a fortunate situation. You know, if people feel that
fortune favors the brave.
So okay, so and most especially your brave decision to
Like
Snake
I am
Arrow.
massively exaggerating the degree to which I slacked off, but
Oh, you
I did have this in mind.
So it was in the back of your mind, but you still kept up with work.
I mean,
and, you did your stuff.
as
Okay.
much as one has to. I do remember my funniest memory of pre-lockdown
Okay.
was when some poor kid came in deciding to be funny in a World War II gas mask about a week and a half before lockdown, and they were sent home and like disciplined heavily for like causing panic.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah. I later saw him wearing it in the local Tesco's.
My man. Legendary.
For the bit.
We thought
For
about
the bit.
100%. You got to do it for the bit, but if the bit doesn't land, you got yourself to blame. So I think that everybody should attempt everything in comedy, but then by the same token, when it fails, you got no one else to blame but yourself. So you have to keep that in mind.
So true, King. So true.
Thank you. These are beautiful truths. Okay, and then so history. You said
History.
and you're doing. And what year are you in now?
The second year, but I'm a third year by age.
By age,
because
okay.
of the working stuff that we mentioned earlier.
Okay, and how do you find it being a year older than your peers?
It's great.
Yeah,
it's great. I mean, in my opinion, the great advantage of it is that you have a little bit more maturity, and that's good. But critically, it's that you know what life is like outside of Oxford. For people that have gone straight from education into university, they don't have a sense of what the outside world is like. But also they've never known anything different. And I think that's even more acute with those generations affected by coronavirus and years of lockdown. So for me, I'm incredibly privileged fortunately, in the sense that I know both how to be a better version of myself, or at least a more mature version of myself, but also that I know that Oxford is a wonderful thing to experience, but also that it is at some level a means to an end. And I think that sensation is slightly more acute because of having been a real participant in the world before.
And so you think that perhaps, does it affect the way that you approach your studies? Are you more pragmatic in terms of, I'm learning this so that I can get X skill for Y task? Or how do you think having that professional experience changes the way you look at a particular assignment or a particular block of study?
I mean, I was already quite cynical about education as a whole.
Okay.
Before coming to Oxford. So I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question, and rather answer a question I want to answer.
Go ahead.
Which is...
People do that. As Kahneman and Tversky indicated, people often substitute a harder question for one that they can answer. That's entirely within the realm of...
I'm substituting an easy question for a harder one, thank you very much.
Oh, okay. An anti-heuristic.
It's not even harder, it's just a rant.
Go ahead.
I am incredibly unimpressed by Oxford University's humanities education and teaching.
Okay.
Not just because it's still ultimately worshipping an exam, and I'm a big opponent of using exams as the be-all and end-all arbiters of educational success, but in particular because, at least for the experience of myself and many of my peers doing humanities degrees, I think for STEM it's a little different because you get so much more lab time and so on. But, take history for example. It is £9,000 for a domestic student a year, and that nets you in one term in Oxford, 3 terms. One term will be between 8 and 12 contact hours, and a book list. Maybe there are some lectures, but they might not even be A, in the term that you're having that teaching, or B, if they're in a different term, they won't be saved online. So you're paying ultimately around £9,000 for about 36 contact hours and a book list. And that book list is books that, sure, are available in the Bodleian or via Solo, but that is essentially the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals.
Do you think
Perhaps
so?
ever.
Do you think that should there,
at an education
one
level,
could argue that you can add additional components, not just the prestige and the title, but also the access to the journals? Although with the advent of the internet, I think there are certain services that will remain unnamed
Z Library.
Yeah, well, I don't know what that's about. That exist. So, but previously, I mean, I think that should be, what's the term, priced in.
This is a complaint unique, I think, to the information age.
Okay.
But certainly, I believe Oxford's worth it.
You heard it here first, folks. If you get an offer, don't turn it down.
Don't know. I mean,
No, I'm
not to be
go on.
clouty.
No.
I only applied to Oxford.
Oh, really? You only applied to Oxford?
Yeah.
Oxford was the only one that accepted me. I applied
Really?
to 5 universities. No, I applied to 5 different, I think St. Andrews Masters Bachelors,
Yeah.
UCL Bachelors, another one Bachelors. Oh boy. Should we cut for a moment? All right, and we're back, folks. Thank you for bearing with our musical interlude. All right, so we were talking about
How you were rejected from every university bar Oxford.
Yes, that's right. I applied on UCAS. I thought I wouldn't get in the first round.
Wow.
I've talked about it before, but the takeaway was that Oxford was the slowest or not the slowest to apply, but their process took the longest amount of time. And so, as I was in Australia during lockdown, feeling like I had to leave
So
Russia.
you went from Russia to Australia?
Yeah, over the summer. There was a long story, but I wasn't happy at the time. Maybe I guess
you weren't happy dab sneezing into your. Look, this man is the paragon of respectability.
Yeah, I think
this man helps little grannies cross the road, and he wears a mask.
Ladies.
Are you in need of a strong man to escort you across Cornmarket?
And so I was
lack of response.
I was watching the UCAS sort of results come in. St. Andrews, no. UCL, no. I think King's College, no. And then I was like, oh, come on, what are the chances? And then University of Oxford said, yes, accepted. I couldn't believe it. At first, I didn't even celebrate because I was so locked into the mindset that it wasn't going to work out that I just looked at it. I was like, wait a second. And yeah, so in a way, I had to settle for Oxford because no other place would take me.
God.
I think maybe it was because somewhere in my personal statement, I indicated the term experimental psychology. And not the personal statement, but maybe the person writing my recommendation mentioned that because I just said that, could you write a recommendation? This is the degree I want to do. What they didn't know was that across all of the UK universities, there's only one university that calls it that, and that's Oxford. So potentially, I'd like to think that maybe my
what other unis call it?
Psychology, social psychology, neuroscience, and psychology. It's one of those terms where it's uniquely Oxford that has that phrasing.
Experimental.
And so they might have. It's a domain that's quite widespread, but I guess
so you gatekept yourself.
In a sense, I guess maybe I'd like to think that it's not just the fact that Oxford.
Pro tip: they call it history at Oxford here. So if you're writing a personal statement,
just call it history.
Have the word history.
But maybe it's her story as well.
Wow, so true, King.
But also their story.
I'm not going to.
So story? Okay. Never mind.
No,
anyway, what? No, not go on there. What?
No.
Anyway, so I'd like to think maybe my application was so strong that they didn't want to give me
his power levels.
They didn't want to give me an offer that I would because I know that in the US I think that's a thing where there's an information asymmetry in many ways with the college application process, but colleges will try to find out if the candidate is several leagues above the college, so that the college doesn't offer a scholarship that the candidate can then think about, but actually have another thing in mind and use. No one wants to be a backup. No university wants to be a backup.
I know that there are some unis in the UK that offer to strong candidates, massive fiscal advantages, not scholarships or anything, but I have a friend who picked up 10K just because the university is like, please come to us.
I'm losing 10K. What's going on here? They must be a very strong candidate.
They're a strong candidate, and it was an okay university.
Interesting, an okay university.
An okay university.
I think fundamentally,
one that had 10K to spend.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Interesting. So then you came to Oxford. You decided to do history, and what is it in history that interests you?
I mean, okay, this is the big brain thing about history at Oxford. Aside from my massive, extensive complaints about education in the information age being very poor, teaching-wise, to finish that point very briefly, I truly believe that equipped with the reading list and YouTube, combined with maybe a couple of documentary or lecture streaming services, you could probably get the exact quality of education you do at Oxford. I think the tutorials are incredibly useful, but I think you could get 90% or 85% of the way there. on your own terms. Oh, and that's my alarm. Why do I have an alarm for this time? I don't know, but I haven't turned it off.
That's all right. So okay, so you yeah, let's go back to that point. Right. I think one of the counter arguments that comes up is you might receive that level of education, but how will employers be able to verify that?
So you get a nice
Unless they
cheeky stamp in
Yeah.
the colour of these seats that goes on the bottom of your CV that says University of Oxford, Trinity or Harris Manchester College, and then everyone's happy clapping.
Yeah, it might be a holdover, but there's also, I think it's a component that's quite significant in the sense that many companies want to cut costs in their recruiting process, and they're often quite hesitant to add new procedures. Notoriously, there are several researchers who developed personality tests that could screen for traits such as conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, and so on. And they are associated with, which is whenever you hear a researcher say there's a strong association, they just don't want to say there's a strong correlation. If this association were actually strong, I would say is caused by, unless you're in the social sciences, in which case they just say so, they leave it vague. Regardless, there is an association between these personality traits and people's aptitude and on certain types of professional roles, and yet companies aren't interested. You can tell them that you're going to save, the expenditure that you have on hiring will be reduced in the next 5 years by a factor of 40, or you could phrase it differently. You could say, would you like to pay me $500 and then receive $400,000 in 5 years' time? People say yes until you tell them, oh, you need to add this. So I think a degree, in a sense, it's a heuristic, but the margin of error is acceptable for many companies.
I don't think you're wrong.
Yeah. But
no, just
to your point,
I don't think you're wrong.
But should there be a better way?
Very possibly.
Yeah.
But as it stands, I have a nice bit of paper with hopefully quite a nice symmetrical number.
Yeah.
On it at the end of my time here, and I'll be dandy.
Mm.
So until the time I come to make public policy, I will just simply complain.
And when you're doing public policy, do you think you'd attempt to reform
the list of things I would attempt to reform would be too extensive to fit on a even very low, small font Word document. It would wrap around the earth several times if printed. That's a very elaborate way of saying I have lots of pet peeves. You know what really grinds my gears?
What grinds your gears?
That was just
But I saw.
I should say I am happy to be here, and I do respect the academics a lot. It's just, I think, quite remarkable how decentralized the approach is, and perhaps that's what Oxford is unique for and good at. But certainly, my champion at the bit is over, as far as that's concerned.
Do you think that people maybe listening to this that aren't at the University of Oxford are thinking about it and are interested in history? What would you say? What would be the profile of a student who shouldn't go to Oxford, or what would be something that they should?
Everyone should apply. Nothing is lost.
Okay.
And everything to gain. And by everything I mean the best thing about Oxford is not, in my opinion, like future-proofing aside, the teaching necessarily, which I've said is already very focused on you, but the people that you meet. My God, you get an education in life unlike any other at this place. So here are your top tips. Always apply no matter what. And do history. It's possibly the single most A, academically flexible, and B, individually flexible degree you can have. Not to say that you don't have to work as much, but there is an old anecdote within the history students that goes, at 6 a.m. the rowers wake up and leave college heading to row. At 9 o'clock they come back and see the maths students waking up to go to breakfast. As the maths students return from their lectures at 11, they see the English students who are waking up to go to breakfast at lunch. And when the English students finally return from their lunch, they see the history students waking up from the bend of the night before, heading off to breakfast.
Interesting.
So that's all I'll say about the workload. My point is, if you have a head on you, you can get around it easily. Or to quote Samuel Johnson, Father of the English Dictionary. When a man knows he's to be hung in the morning, it concentrates his mind wonderfully. When you have that deadline in 8 hours, by God, 2 o'clock in the morning seems like the best possible time to read and write simultaneously. Putting that aside, academic flexibility, a history degree, both is a good degree that looks nice, but it has so much flexibility. It can essentially be turned into, in my opinion, a philosophy, politics, language, or foreign language or English-based degree. In other words, you have almost half, 2/3 of the humanities options available within the framing of history. So for me personally, I will be sitting 3 finals exams next year. One of them will be on war in Eurasia, 1200 to 1945. Sexy, fun. Battles, warfare, Napoleon.
The good stuff.
The good stuff. And then my other 2 exams will be on political theory and social science, 1780 to 1920, and neoliberalism and postmodernism. And both of those, sure, have some historical elements within them in terms of framing. They're in the past, but those are both politics and philosophy units respectively. And that's within the framing of a history degree. I know friends that are doing language papers, they've picked up a whole foreign language. Within history, that's a big part of what they'll ultimately be marked on. I have friends that are doing literal units taken directly from the English literature department that are taught by English literature tutors, but that you can just opt into within history. So yes, apply to Oxford, don't let anyone stop you, and give history a shot, as you can have a lot of fun with it.
Do you think there was something in your GCSE and 6th form sort of life, or in that period of your life, that you changed? That was there something that made you the kind of person that would be accepted by Oxford University? Were you always someone who was sort of academically focused, or was there a switch?
I wouldn't say I'm necessarily academically focused. I mean, this comes to my sort of earlier qualms with the exam-based systems. I don't think there was a switch. I think I was fortunate to be raised by good parents and have a lot of opportunities and be interested in things that I could then turn into academic productivity. I'm very lucky in the sense that the stuff that I read about and have fun with in my own terms, I can also get marked on. So yeah. I think I'm lucky in that sense. I think it's more difficult to take a passing fancy at quadratic parabolas in the same way, if you get me.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I'm working my way through Richard Feynman's sort of. I read his biography by Gleek,
sure.
Which is very interesting. Are you familiar with Richard Feynman at all?
He's a physicist, right?
Yeah, he was a physicist who worked on the atom bomb, but prior and after that, he was sort of very talented and also had this sort of zany persona, played the bongos, and he hated that. He hated that he would come to a conference and people would start with that. And he said, actually, by the way, I also do physics. But he was very passionate and he had a very unorthodox
Well, I said
way.
he was a physics person rather than bongo man.
There you are. And he had this sort of childlike wonder to him. And reading this other book, which sort of more lighthearted, it's a collection of his sort of stories of his life. He continually describes the fact that he could sort of trick other students in his MIT class by telling them that if you took a slider and you went to the lowest point, the tangent there would be a straight line, and that it was designed that way particularly. And people did that and like, wow, Richie, you know. And then he said, well, 3 weeks ago, they had all learned that the derivative of, at the minimum of any graph has a tangent that's a straight line. And so, or I forget the specifics, but he was sort of, or he asked a guy who was collaborating with Einstein about a question of, what was it? Real time, absolute time, but rather than phrasing it in a formalism of equations and symbols, he said, if you have a clock on the Earth and a clock inside a rocket ship, if you want to do it, in simple terms, he was stunned by the fact that many people weren't able to translate their knowledge that they had learned by rote or sort of within that narrow context. And as soon as it was applied to a more sort of everyday, or it was reformatted into layman's terms, they just couldn't solve it. And I think that that's sort of related to your point, where you can have an interest and one that sort of goes into academia. And likewise, you can have things that you study, which you are then able to extract into everyday life.
I mean, okay, to build on that example, a math for our American audience, a math student will have that very good knowledge, but they won't necessarily incorporate that into when they're driving their car, working out braking distances as they're going, right? There is a degree of applicability that certainly I think gatekeeps some degrees from being used in non-professional contexts. Adding to that, take this hypothetical math student that's not very good at driving. For all of the stuff they do at maths, they're also going to have their hobbies and passions. Maybe they like movies, maybe they like history, maybe they're involved in politics and follow it.
Or they like listening to the OxPod.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But the point is that all of that has to come as supplementary to their vocation. Whereas for me, all of that supplementary stuff is the very stuff.
Oh, okay.
That I end up having to churn out the old essay on.
And do you find that tiresome ever? I've played in sort of around with having all of my hobbies and extracurricular activities feed into my degree, or to have them completely separate. And one worry that sort of nags at me is that if I devote all of my out of degree time into things which are related to my degree, it will sort of backfire and I'll just be exhausted. Do you ever find that? Or
I mean,
you're a better student than I am.
Hardly. I would say it makes me a more efficient student.
Yeah. So do you find that that's something I'm really interested? Is there a balance that you need to strike?
It's just what I'm passionate about. And I mean, if anything, it probably goes too far the other way. I will resort to drawing on things that I'm interested in and have been reading about outside perhaps the narrow purview of a specific mark scheme, a specific essay. You know, the number of times, about 3, the number of times that my tutors have sort of written, this is a good point, but slightly outside of the scope of this essay because I've gone on some Žižekian rant
I see.
about this or that or t'other. I would say my challenge is not so much getting bored or burnt out from the stuff that I like, but rather bringing it in too much.
Yeah, it's about striking that balance. And that is the thing where I suppose just reading a little bit about neuroscience, psychology, I feel that tug of war of, am I expending some sort of finite capacity that I have to engage with the subject properly on things that are outside of the reading list?
Sure.
I've thought about going full-blown Patrick Bateman and reading...
Sorry, I need to return some videotapes.
And reading my set reading for pleasure before bed. But it feels like maybe I'm hesitant to experiment with it more, but I think that there is the mindset that I have to be in when I'm in the library and I'm focusing. It's work. It's hard work. That doesn't mean that I resent it or I don't like it, but that it's a challenge. It's almost a form of mental warfare where there's a problem and it seems intractable and I'm banging my head against the wall. And it seems like that I'm not yet able to come at it in the same way that Richard Feynman can or could. And that's quite a lofty thing. He's one of the greats. But I am fascinated by it, and I wonder how, if it's the sort of ballerina principle of working so hard that it looks effortless, but in actual fact, it's the product of very long labor. But that element of play that often sort of either amazed or frustrated or even disheartened his colleagues. There's stories and biographies about Feynman where there'll be young graduate physicists who would come up to him and then sort of try to outcompete him in sort of mental arithmetic or something and just be destroyed, just completely destroyed, and then start to think that maybe they need to go back into maths or they need to go onto a different subject. There's letters that were recovered by Gleek, Feynman's biographer. This guy saying, I thought I was the best in the country, and then this Feynman guy appears and suddenly he outperforms me in everything and then just leaves drunk, does it all in his head. But and that's
the Rick Sanchez of
in a way, there definitely was that element. He had it, and I wonder, how does one? Is it intrinsic? Can one learn to become playful and yet disciplined? To play with what interests them, and to love it and to sort of toy with it, but at the same time not turn that into procrastination. Where when the going gets tough, then they're memorizing things or engaging with things that aren't necessarily interesting, but that need to be done.
Maybe. I think that anyone worth their salt needs to have a little bit of that sort of self-destructive drive in them at some level that can both consume them and what they are sort of interacting with, focusing on. I don't know that I have a grand thesis that can answer your question, but I think I can say that you need to have that hunger, that fire, at least motivating you in some way. And that as long as there's those embers, you can feed on them and achieve hopefully great things.
It's very powerful.
It's a phrase. I know it's not Feynman, but I remember reading many years ago, back when I considered myself to perhaps do STEM. I first came to Oxford as a prospective student, thinking I might do physics and philosophy. Thank God, thank God, I didn't. That would have been nightmarish. But no, the quote was a mathematician discussing the importance of mental elasticity. And he said, I had a student who wasn't creative enough to be a mathematician, but now he's a poet and he's doing fine.
Ah, interesting.
Which
I struggled with mathematics for a long time, and I thought that I was just doomed to be awful at it until in university. I remember distinctly I got 100% on an exam, and I came into the room to discuss the exam with the marker. And he was saying, oh, you made an arithmetical error here. And then I immediately said, oh, this. And then he saw that I knew the problem, but that I had made this arithmetical issue. Something that universities are lenient about and something that schools are not lenient with. But then he corrected it to 100. And then I was just shocked. This was, I had spent all my life just being ashamed of my mathematical inability. And then he saw how just in awe I was, and he said, what, are you going to tell your grandkids? And I said, I think I am, honestly, man, I'm going to. That changed a lot for me. And I still, in the words of my statistics tutor for prelims, shout out to Charles, a legend.
Shout out to Jo, she was my teacher. Politics, keyboard.
And
Charles, Jo, we love you.
We love you both.
You were saying.
He said, oh, well, Rick, you'd be a phenomenal statistician were it not for these little slips, such as 7 + 1 = 23, or something like that. But I did well I got a distinction in my stats exam. But the point I was making is that and we're back. We're so back.
Backer than ever before.
At university, I've gained an appreciation for the fact that mathematics can involve creativity. As someone who might have, I'm not big on the whole diagnosis obsession, but I do feel that I'd probably fit the criteria for dyscalculia. Maybe there's a disposition, but I saw it as rote memorization. Just over and over and over, that it's about these rigid boilerplate formulae and about using your working memory to hold, which is still quite respectable in and of itself, of just holding 5 variables in your head and performing it like some sort of ritual in a sense. And then I saw for the first time that there were problems where the solution wasn't self-evident, not because you didn't know the correct formula, but because there were 5 that could potentially be applied. Now there was this room for interpretation, for coming up with the most effective solution, not just the one that's at the back of the textbook. That, I think, was when I realized, oh my God, mathematics is beautiful. And it might just be related to getting that grade and thinking, oh, well, maybe there's hope.
Which your grandchildren will hear of.
Which my grandchildren will most definitely hear of.
Good, lucky them.
But yeah, I think there's room for creativity in every discipline, but to get there, you have to get through the rote memorization stage. It's sort of the whole Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. You have to go through all that before, and if you don't, if there's any factor, whether it's ability or what's happening at home, anything, then somebody can go halfway through the process of learning something and be left with the erroneous impression that it is all just rote memorization and boring. I think maybe part of school is pushing kids through that filter until they get, even if they never pursue it again, but to get a glimpse of how anything within the domain, or any academic pursuit or any human pursuit can be wonderful and amazing. And then it's such a problem because it's kind of like therapy in psychology. If you do cognitive behavioral therapy, before it gets better, it gets worse. and sometimes people will drop out. You can't force them to adhere to the thing. They drop out through halfway through the program, and they're left worse than they were in the beginning. And I wonder if there's an analogy there with schooling, when many people leave and they either hate English or they hate maths. Those are the big two. Rarely do you hear someone who really hated something like geography.
No one hated history. Come on.
Yeah. Oh, but because they were left with that impression that it's just the wax on, wax off.
Yeah.
They never saw that once they just had that capability, that a large portion of the population is capable of. Once you get those tools, then you have that room to really go crazy.
It's about giving, it's exactly that. The rote memorization gives you a tool set that you can then begin applying in new, fun, interesting ways of your own discretion.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we've been going for a while. This has been fantastic. The time flies.
And 18 minutes or something like that.
And you say you do history. Look at those upside down calculations. This has been very powerful. I really enjoy this.
Alsford.
Alsford. Yes, that's right. The village was Alsford.
It was Alsford.
Shout out to Alsford.
Shout out to Alsford. And the cooperative. They're very nice cooperative.
This has been phenomenal. Thank you so much.
It's been a joy.
You dropped that STEM bomb there at the last minute, in the sense, not as in stem cell weaponry, but more that you were interested in STEM. I want to get into that. You need to come back on the OxPod. We need to discuss that.
It'll be my pleasure. It's been very
fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much. Is there any? I'm aware that you're doing stuff with the union. You're doing you've got a society that you manage. Do you want to mention any of that to those listening?
I think anyone that's listening that has heard the name Leo Buckley will be far too familiar with my life outside of things discussed here. So I'll leave it for them.
What a plug! What a plug! If you know, you know.
But it's not if you know, you know. It's I've probably proselytized about them to you before.
Oh, fantastic! Okay.
For those fresh to me, I am a ridiculous union hag, and also live on a boat. That's fun.
You live on a boat. We should have. Listen, can we re-roll? We'll start with the boat. We'll get you. You need to come back and tell us about your boat. You need to tell us about your boat.
I was there this morning.
You were there this morning.
I do live on it.
You live on the boat. That's your accommodation.
Yeah, with a view of Christchurch Meadow.
You live on a boat.
Yeah, with a view of the cows, the Merton Tower. It's cool.
Stay tuned, folks. There's going to be another episode in the near future.
Would that float your boat?
It would float my boat.
Wow.
It would definitely pepper my kettle. Yes. Amazing. Powerful. Yes, that's right. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And thank you guys at home for tuning in. As always, stay tuned for more. Let us know if there's a particular guest that you'd like to see next time, or come on the OxPod yourself. We've got an Instagram page now, so you can DM us there, and you can also just shout at me on the street. I'm going to regret saying that.
I'm going to shout at you as I leave now. I'm going to holler through the window.
Phenomenal.
Oi, Rick, can I be on the OxPod?
You may.
I'll hurl a little brick with like a note saying, "Can I appear again?" Like attached to the brick via an elastic band. That window there.
Is this related to why you live on a boat?
No.
Is this your boat? Okay.
No.
We'll get to the bottom of this boat quest. Thank you guys so much. Thank you again to our lovely producer Ross. All the best. Stay tuned for more, folks. Bye.
Ciao.